procurement in a profit-generating function. I'm Conrad Snover, CEO at Procurability. Joining me is Chris Sawchuk, Principal at the Hackett Group. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Together, we'll explore 3 proven strategies to help procurement leaders reimagine their function and position their organization as a true strategic partner to the business. So as we go along, please drop in your questions. We'll answer them at the end of the event if we have time. If we run out of time and we don't have time to address all the questions, we'll follow up afterwards. So let's dive in. So Chris, let's start by setting the stage for our conversation today. I'm thinking about just building a little bit of framework before we jump into it. So what we're looking at today, market uncertainty, shifting tariffs, supply chain disruptions, all of this is creating a challenging environment for procurement professionals across the board. Enabling value for the business is more important than ever, which in my opinion brings us to our foundational question. What is required of procurement teams to position themselves for the next evolution of their organization's strategic contributions to the business? That's a little bit of a mouthful. But what I want to talk about first is the fundamentals, because I believe that we talk about a lot of cool stuff. But before we can do anything, before we can evolve anywhere, we have to excel at the basic procurement operational fundamentals. I'm referring here to the table stakes, things like acceptable cycle time, robust value generation, savings tracking methodology, etc. Then, with a solid foundation in place, we can focus on developing and implementing a strategic approach to enabling value, earning the proverbial seat at the table. This is only through or attained by serving as a true strategic partner in the business. So you got step 1, build the foundations. Step 2, implement a strategic approach, truly drive outsized value, earn a seat at the table. Step 1, step 2. Only after all that has been accomplished can we take the next step and reimagine procurement as a profit engine, focusing on innovation to drive value. The challenge that every procurement organization needs to overcome is simply evolving to the point through step 1, through step 2, where we've now earned the right to engage with internal stakeholders about procurement strategic importance and value creation potential. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, well, I want to start with your first comment there, is there's a foundation. And it reminds me of a model that we introduced to the market and, back in 2008. And it was a period of time where, we were seeing a lot of inflationary pressures in the marketplace, and organizations were being challenged to just deliver on what you were calling the foundation, the cost savings, the cost reduction that we need as an organization. But one of the things that you see today is that's changing. And I always say is that if you can't deliver on the foundation, you really have no right. So in a lot of ways, you have to be able to earn the right to be strategic in your organization. And that's building on the cost reduction in the organization. But even more foundation to that is assurance of supply. It's getting access and ensuring access to the supply to protect your revenue. So these things become foundational to be able to go do a lot of the other things that we want to talk about today.
So Chris, 2 questions. Number 1, for those procurement organizations that have the basics down and their operations are running efficiently, how do they elevate their strategic value delivery? And number 2, how do you think procurement leaders can start to shift their mindset and reimagine their function as a profit engine? Just so how do we sort of get the fundamentals down? How do we get going on this?
I think there's a couple of different areas, and as you look at it, it is a mindset change. You can create a mindset in terms of focusing on cost within the organization and focusing on the assurance of supply and protecting the revenue generation of the company. But you have to change your mindset as you start to consider, how can we be a contributor to the profitability of our organization in a lot of different and broad ways? As you highlighted, being a profit center to the organization. And when you consider a profit center, you have to consider both the bottom line, the cost, as well as top line. And so it requires a mindset change within the organization. And it really starts with the supply management organization itself that they understand and start thinking in actually being a profit center, running a business within a business.
I think you're spot on. I think I mean, I agree with your, going back to your first comment, procurement must protect the company's profitability at the bottom line through these fundamentals before expanding the top line, 100%.
Yeah.
Now it's time to start managing procurement in the supply chain like a business.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to start generating funding through things like rebates, value-added services like supply chain coordination models.
Yeah.
I would say the ideal model delivers value to both the enterprise and to the supply base, who candidly will be responsible for the funding. So this is things like supplier collaboration agreements, looking for mutual opportunities to implement supply chain logistical improvements or supply chain operational improvements, things like that. So that's where my head's at on this.
Yeah. Well, there's, and as we were saying, there's foundational things that you have to go do. But for me, if I look at the next stage of any of this, it's the protection of what we're able to actually do as well. And, if you look at profitability, we want to be a profit center. We have to deliver on the basics, as an organization, as we've just highlighted. But the other thing is, if we are going to create profits, we have a responsibility to protect those profits as well as an organization. And as we're all aware today, we're dealing with a lot of challenges in the marketplace that are external to our organizations. Namely today is the tariffs, and that's having an impact on us. And so we may not necessarily be driving additional profits, but what we are doing, and most of us are doing, is we're trying to manage and mitigate the impact of those tariffs. But if you went back 2 years ago, what we were dealing with was disruptions coming out of the pandemic, and not just the disruptions to supply from the pandemic, but other things that were occurring as well. Whether it be the Suez Canal, whether it be the Texas, freeze, all of these things were causing supply chain disruptions. And during that period of time, procurement was really elevated to help protect that revenue stream of the organization, at the same time protecting the profitability of the organization as well. I think one of the challenges that supply chain leaders have is that, for a long time, we were designing supply chains based on cost. I've done a lot of research over the years, and one of the things that we focused on in one of the research pieces was just looking at what was the focus, what was the design criteria coming into 2020. And it was all around and very heavily weighted to cost. What we see now is that we're balancing risk within the supply chain. And so we're building this agility within our models to do what you've highlighted, and that is to protect our profitability as an organization. But, one of the things, Conrad, you've highlighted and you've done a lot in this particular space. And one of the things that I'd be interested in your long career, you have a career that's similar to mine in terms of the length of time we've been involved in the supply chain and supply management space. What are some of the things that you've seen? These are some of the things that I've seen, but what are some of the things that you've seen during that period of time?
Well, it's really what I was, I'm going to build on what I just mentioned a second ago, which was rebates, value-added services, supply chain coordination, things like that. These models are only available to us through well-structured and mutually beneficial supplier partnerships. Mm-hmm. So I think we should talk about, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we develop these strategic supplier partnerships, because what you just talked about, through whether it was through the pandemic or Suez Canal or any other geopolitical issues that we're dealing with, where do the solutions come from? They come from the areas where you have strategic supplier partnerships. Yeah. So I want to talk about that, because first, let's talk about how we treat our suppliers. Of course, we need to select suppliers competitively, but then let's shift the mindset away from a transactional, or even an adversarial relationship. And let's start treating our suppliers as customers. Let's build alliances and partnerships that are focused on collaboration. Again, this is what gets us through times
Yeah.
of challenging times, right? Shortages or other issues. It's the supplier relationships that where we have an advanced level of relationship that get us through. These relationships create the opportunity for high value creation models, right? This is where the door gets open to value engineering, spec reviews, alternatives, joint cost savings with the suppliers. This is the kind of stuff I talk about all the time, where a supplier says, hey, I've got a better idea for the way you can do things. That will
Yeah.
lower my cost. It'll lower your cost. We both win. It'll lower my hassle. It'll lower the supply chain cost. It'll show shipping costs. It'll lower your installation cost, whatever it is. And it's a joint cost saving mindset. You know, we pioneered this concept called supplier development 30 years ago when we were working with entrenched alliance suppliers where we had close partnerships with that we had close partnerships with, and it was time to like renegotiate, rebid the contract. And it's like, well, okay, I really don't want to lose this supplier, but I need to show governance. And so that's one issue. And like, how do you tackle that? And some of
Yeah.
it is, you know, you do periodically need to revisit the marketplace and ensure governance and cost competitiveness and everything else. But what do you do for that time period after you put that supplier relationship in place for the next 3, 4, or 5 years of that
Yeah.
alliance? And how do you, what sort of formal structured process do you have to work with a supplier to generate mutual benefit, to generate these joint cost savings initiatives, to look for areas of opportunity where we can do some of these other things I mentioned earlier, whether it's a rebate or a new supply chain operating model. But this close partnership, these close alliance relationships, this close customer kind of mindset is what it's going to take to get us there. And then I'm going to add one other dimension to this, which is, you know, nobody within the organization has more insight into the supply market than procurement, obviously. Therefore, my recommendation is that procurement be engaged with corporate development discussions, since procurement is so well positioned to see all the suppliers and to identify potential M&A targets. So procurement can say, hey, this supplier has a new product, new service. We buy from them all the time. They're a strategic partner of ours. Maybe we should acquire that supplier. Maybe we should bring them into the fold. And so that's something that we're starting to see as well with like true procurement innovation. How can procurement truly generate much more than cost savings, but now outsized value for the organization, profitability through acquisition?
Yeah.
Maybe that would be the third one I'd add to the supplier partnerships. What do you think?
Well, and it's interesting. You know, the other day I was on a call with a leader of procurement in a CPG organization, and we were talking, and he made a comment, and he used the term RFP. Well, for most of us, we'd hear RFP, and the first thing you think is request for a proposal.
Of course.
What he was referring to is a request for partnership. And what he was highlighting is that this is that next level. As you're engaging with those suppliers, it's a different level of responsibility. And going back to, you know, one of the things that you mentioned earlier is this mindset change that we have to have. You know, moving from the foundation, you know, of protecting supply and, you know, reducing cost and even helping to mitigate, you know, some of these challenges that we have in the current environment. We have to have a mindset change to be able to go do that. And the mindset change is that when we think of suppliers, we have to look at them as the opportunity. If you're going to do more and look for profitability, you know, within the organization, and how do I extract that through supply? That exists in the supply base. You know, to your point, that's where the innovation is. We as leaders and, you know, individuals and practitioners in the supply management space have to be able to identify that. We have to develop and nurture those relationships, and we have to be able to get to a point where those suppliers that we're working with are willing to bring their ideas to us versus our competitors and our peers. You know, I did an exercise with an organization years ago, and we just went through, and you know, they were saying, you know, we went out and we didn't understand why the suppliers weren't bringing their innovation to this particular company. And it came down to simple things like, well, you never asked. But the way they assessed it, they just went through and say, here are all the different areas. Here's you. Here's all our peers, in our industry. What are you doing with our peers that you're not doing with us? And it was very eye-opening for them to understand we're not capitalizing on the relationships with those suppliers.
Spot on. So let's move on to our second strategy. And this is about turning sustainable procurement into a revenue engine.
Yeah.
I've got a couple examples here. I think about this as an evolution over time. So how we tend to view it now, let's just go there. How we tend to view it now is the circular economy should turn waste into profit. Asset recovery on the secondary market through a scrap auction, refurbishment, recycling, reuse. I think a lot about Retronics, the global leader in IC recovery. They're a great example of this. It's a full end-to-end supply chain model. The benefits of sustainable procurement are also focused on just simply doing the right thing, taking care of our planet, acting with a responsible, respectful, non-wasteful mindset. This is something we all can focus on every day. And sometimes there's direct cost impacts of that. I have talked here on LinkedIn some stories about how a supplier said, hey, let's change the packaging model that will decrease my cost to package. It'll the cost to ship will actually go down because the packaging is lighter and smaller, and your cost to process the receipt of the material will go down because it's less labor intensive. Win-win across the board. Now, this to me sounds like you could put it in value engineering. You could also put it in sustainable procurement. There's a lot less waste. We're not breaking down and throwing away packaging anymore. We're just using reusable packaging and restructuring and right-sizing the package to be smaller and more efficient. We're using less fuel to ship. It's just more efficient across the board. Is it value engineering? Is it cost savings? It doesn't matter. We're just doing the right thing. It's a more efficient process that also costs less, that also has less waste. So I put that in the bucket of sustainable procurement.
Yeah.
Now, how do you think CPOs should tackle their fear of getting started in this? Maybe initial investments or startup, or I'm not sure how to handle this.
Yeah.
Where do we get started?
I think the first thing and critical to this is just the alignment between procurement / supply management in the business. Businesses have potentially different perspectives on sustainability. There are organizations out there that sustainability for them and what they need to do is meeting the requirements that are out there in the marketplace and just making sure that we're in compliance with all of those. And there are others that say, hey, we're going to look at this, not only comply, but we're going to look at trying to create an advantage through sustainable procurement, something that we can make a difference. And again, this is where that profit-minded mindset comes into play. So I think you have to be aligned, and it's difficult. It's not something that's going to be driven through procurement through the rest of the organization. It's in ensuring that whatever we're doing with our suppliers is aligned with the intentions, the objectives, and the strategies of the overall enterprise itself.
It's just like so many other dimensions we talk about, right? We see followers focused on compliance and leaders focused on innovation.
Yeah.
So let's dive into our final strategy, leveraging data-driven procurement. Chris, can you share your favorite examples of how predictive analytics help stop leaks, flag risks, innovation, et cetera?
This is a real big topic. As you well know, everybody's talking about data today because of AI. I think, one of the things I used to talk about data, back when we were only focused on digital technologies, and it was always, you need a good data foundation, to ingest data as well as, those systems are going to exhaust data as well. Well, today we know that with AI. In our recent study that we did, it's our key issue study and I've already cited a few things from that. But, when we asked in that study, we wanted to understand where are organizations when it comes to engaging with data. And when we talk about engaging with data, it's really analytics. It's engaging with that. And in many ways, what we found was that, and I have to always look at the percentages, but 58% to 73% of organizations across a whole list of different areas that you would engage in analytics, whether that be in demand planning, spend planning, scenario planning, et cetera. We're only focused today using descriptive analytics, the most basic form of reporting in our organizations. But what we're finding when we ask them, we said, if we're sitting here 3 years from now, where do you see yourself engaging in analytics? And so that percentage, not surprising, moved to the right much more significantly. And so what you're seeing is organizations see themselves being much more predictive and much more prescriptive with the data that they're engaging with. Data is one of those areas I like to say data wins. If you're an organization, you not only want to be a profit center, but you want to create a competitive advantage to your organization, it's with data. Harvard did a study. I do a lot of training and negotiations as part of what we do. And, one of the things I would highlight is that Harvard did a study and said if you had two negotiators come to the table, one that had a lot of skills in negotiations and the other was informed with a lot of data, who would have the advantage? Well, the study that they did many years highlighted it's not the skills help, it's the data that gives you the advantage. And so this is why it's so critical in what we go do. It gives us a competitive advantage. If you look at the future of supply management, you look at the future of procurement, it's not about the processes that we execute. It's the intelligence that we glean, that we pull together, and we provide to our organization that gives us an advantage. It's not just the intelligence itself, it's the timeliness by which our organizations can act on that intelligence to create a competitive advantage.
We shifted a long time ago, not a long time ago, it feels like a long time ago, but probably recently. We shifted from data and analytics and procurement from being backward facing. How much did you spend with that supplier? How many of those did you buy? How much did you spend in this category or this portfolio? Well, that's interesting, of course. But again, that's the fundamentals. And what we need to evolve towards is this much more higher value stream activity of predictive analytics. And I love that you started with that. I like to think of procurement as sitting in the crow's nest. Procurement up there in the crow's nest of the ship, the first to see market changes, the first to see leading indicators out of supplier data, things like financial hardship, risk, delayed invoicing, early payment requests, things that might potentially indicate solvency concerns with your supply base. Whoa, red flag, time to diversify my supply base, work on my sustainability, my diversification strategy of whether it's plants, suppliers, materials, equipment, geographies, whatever it is. Also, material and resource shortages, longer lead times, things that might indicate production issues. And on the positive side, how about, again, procurement's at the front, has the front row seat to new products, new service offerings. My point here is that procurement in that front row seat should be the first we see them first.
Yeah.
And don't forget, let's build a model for sharing these indicators internally. Let's lead the discussions about what to do about it. Hey, engineering, your favorite supplier is giving me some concerns on solvency. Hey, product, your favorite suppliers have some really cool new service offerings. Let's talk about whether they can help us get to market faster. Procurement can be in the driver's seat if we take ourselves out of that, if we earn that seat like we talked about.
Absolutely. And as you've been highlighting, it's the relationship. It started with supplier relationships and went into data. But a lot of that data, that intelligence exists in the supply markets. And it's the responsibility of procurement to understand that and bring it internally and place it appropriately within the organization. So.
This has been a great discussion so far. And before we open it up and take a few questions, let's just talk about how to put these strategies into action and share a use case. I'll start off with the top actions that I think procurement leaders can take tomorrow to start their journey towards becoming a profit center. Number one, assess, prioritize, and target your most strategic supplier relationships. We talk about supplier partnerships. This is what I mean. This is where alignment is most likely to continue. Let's figure out how to build on the relationships we already have. Very, very simple. Number two, use strategic sourcing and category management, even supplier relationship management through supplier development, like I mentioned earlier, to maintain a finger on the pulse and look for opportunities to monetize, whether it's, again, I'll repeat what I said before: rebates,
Hmm.
supply chain improvement opportunities, supplier innovations, opportunities for procurement to actually monetize the supplier relationship.
Hmm.
And then look, build that, create an action plan, and then take it. Like procurement doesn't exist for procurement's sake. Even in a profit
Yeah.
centered model, procurement does not exist for procurement's sake. Procurement exists to support the business. So align with the business partners on their plans, whether it's supplier offerings, whether it's these other things I mentioned, or it's this inorganic growth objectives. It's this M&A corporate development thing I mentioned, where procurement has this lens. Educate your business unit partners about the lens that you have into the supplier landscape and that you could identify their next acquisition target. What
Yeah.
did I miss, Chris? What do you want to add to that one?
Well, what I'd like to add, and it wouldn't be a webcast or podcast or LinkedIn cast, like we have today, without having a point on AI and
Of
digital
course.
technologies. So, today, if you talk about all the things that you highlighted, all those capabilities, we talked about the foundations, the relationships, the data, et cetera. This is all and will be enabled through these types of technologies. And so, becoming that profit center, becoming that competitive advantage to the organization is only going to be enhanced, enabled, and accelerated with these types of technologies for those that know how to use them.
The I want to wrap up with a case study and then let's look to the questions. But procurability is part of Jabil, global supply chain manufacturing company. Jabil's head of supply chain reports into the CEO, directly into the CEO. This demonstrates how procurement is seen as a strategic partner to the business and has, incidentally, direct impacts to the bottom line. This is a great example of how procurement has developed a seat at the table. And so I just love this example that we live and see every day. Not only do we recommend clients and to clients and help advise clients on how to achieve that, but that's what we have back home. So I think it's great to bring it back, full circle to here's a case study where it actually works. That's where a lot of my examples come from, both advising our clients and internally. So it's just kind of fun to bring it home that way with the final the case study. So why don't we look at the questions? Because I think we have maybe 1 or 2 minutes. I don't know
Yeah.
if you see I don't know if you see a favorite one that you want to pull, but I have.
I see the one in front
So,
of us right
oh,
now.
there it is. Yeah, there it is. Okay.
Partnership and reducing the cost. Um, I think you and I touched on this a bit, and it's when I look at supplier innovation, a lot of organizations will ask us, and they say, well, if I'm going to go and innovate with suppliers, how do I make that happen? And the question here is, what's the best strategy to engage? When I look at innovation, I look at procurement becoming less of a process executioner and one that is a linkage between the supply base and the supply network and your internal. And so you become sort of a connection point between those two different capabilities within the organization. You need to understand what's going on internally and externally to bring that together. But the key thing is to understand is that, how are you going to measure success? You mentioned cost, but, there's a lot of ways that suppliers can enable innovation within your company, and that could be time to market. Today velocity is king in terms of speed or time to volume. It can be cost to be able to provide more optionality for the organization when it goes to market with whatever product that is. It can be new innovations in terms of the product itself. So there's a lot of ways it can innovate. The critical thing for procurement is you got to engage the two parties. That innovation isn't necessarily coming from procurement, it's coming from the suppliers. You have to make that happen.
Exactly. If procurement continues to exist as a group of order takers that takes an order or request from the business and goes and buys that thing. Okay, I need 5 more. Okay, I bought 5 more. I need 10 more. I bought 10 more. Okay, now I need 6 of these, 4 of those. Okay, here's 6 of these and 4 of those. Then this supplier innovation, the supplier partner, it's irrelevant. But when procurement says, oh, you need 10 of those, well, you bought 5 last month and then you bought 10 this month, and like maybe we should put together a contract that's a little more interesting than just 5 at a time or 10 at a time. And by the way, suppliers been telling me like, hey, you can continue to buy those if you want, I'll sell you those, but I've got this other thing that gives you what you need, and it's way more cost effective and it's
Yeah.
easier for me. So like, can we talk about that instead? And so now we're really talking about joint innovation. So the answer to the question, direct answer to the question is it's critical, but it requires procurement to operate with an innovative mindset as well. So I think that's a great way to wrap up today's discussion with that question. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I think now, Brittany, do we have, remind me of our wrap up here. So we have, there we go. Okay, so if you liked today's conversation, thanks for joining us. We have a couple resources here for you. Click on, you can just point your phone at your screen. You've got a QR code, and you can subscribe to Procurability's Insights page. And let's see, and I'll just kind of wrap it up with a comment here, Chris. Thank you on behalf of Procurability and all of our fans out there for sharing your insights on turning procurement into a profit center. For all of you out there, we hope you've gained valuable insights into the opportunities, the challenges of reimagining procurement as a profit center, working on the fundamentals, working up the value chain. If you'd like to learn more, obviously you're here on LinkedIn, connect with us, follow us on LinkedIn, scan that QR code, sign up for our insights. And then we have other events in the future. So just a quick plug for June 24th webinar with Art of Procurement with my colleague, Darshan Deshmukh. They're going to be exploring geopolitical agility, future-proofing for supply chain uncertainty. We'll drop the registration link in the chat. Thanks everybody for attending. Thanks again, Chris, for joining me. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you. And we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.